Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom podcast. I've got Paul Spencer here, and he's been on the show before. And I've also been doing a lot of readings with him based on just like the high amount of signal that he gives in his posts. And I suggest all of you to reach out to him about that because it has been quite the adventure following in. And I come from a scientism background, and that was the water that I swam in as an intellectual fish. And scientism has become totally bankrupt, and now. So it opened up astrology, which is just this thing that the scientism completely denies any of it. And then in your post, you've been able to accurately kind of map out, not with specific predictions about things that will happen, although there are some things like that where you're talking about war this year and war this summer, and now that was kind of happening with the Israel and uh, uh, Iran thing. So sorry for all that. Welcome to the show, Paul. How are you doing?
Great. It's good to be here again. Thank you for having me on.
Yep. So we I want to dive right into the AI and astrology. Have you been using AI?
Okay.
What is your take on that and relationship to astrology?
Yeah, so I put out a kind of abstract post maybe about a month ago criticizing AI regarding astrology because I had written a short kind of 10-page treatise back in 2021,
Mm.
and we'll touch on this again when we talk about fate, but it was about fate versus free will and time versus space. It was those two dichotomies. And the issue, it was basically trying to explain to people, well, what is astrology? What is looking at cycles? What is looking at patterns? What does that even mean? And I had to put the human at the center of that conversation, hence the title Energy is a Story, because we're talking about all these disembodied mathematical points and how planets relate to each other and how that creates some kind of pattern that we're supposed to be maybe on guard against or something like that. People talk about stars like being fated and creating these events that you have to react to. Well, I described it more as a story because the human consciousness is an interface for time and space, is an interface for fate and free will, because they are um, embodied. They are space is time crystallized.
Mm.
And so we're crystallized in a 3D vessel, but we're also, according to a lot of Western philosophy, the human is the animal that's aware of death, it's aware of time. And so because we stand at that crossroads or that intersection, we have this unique purpose. We have story, we have meaning, which is very different from other creatures. And so, if energy is a story and we understand fate and free will and time and space as intersecting in human consciousness, embodiment is a big part of that because you're moving around, you're making decisions, and then your decisions then influence what, let's say, the dominant context that we would call fate can hand over to you as like a fork in the road. Everything that you do affects the forks that are presented to you. It's not like there's just this backlog of forks that's just constantly rolling out like on an assembly line, and it doesn't respond to what you do. And, that gives us a lot of understanding of history. The North won the Civil War, not the South. That's the timeline that we exist on. We took that fork and it stamps it in time. We can't go back to where we are currently having this conversation to where the South won.
Mm.
And so our actions do affect the forks that come afterwards. Now, AI doesn't have any skin in the game regarding that because it constantly shuffles perspective and context. Now, that can be useful,
Yeah.
especially as an intellectual or creative person who tends to shuffle context, who tends to change perspectives in order to create things and live a fulfilling life. But we're still a human and we still have like a moral quest for meaning and story that we're on. And so it's not that we make these perspectival shifts from a position of pure relativism, although that's an ideology that a lot of people have been fighting against for the past 10, 20, 30 plus years. It's that things aren't relativist. It's that certain things do matter to us, that we do have goals that we're aiming for. And because AI is embodied and it doesn't have death as a timeline, and
Mhm.
that's where we get into the don't die ideology of Brian Johnson and the transhumanists who want to upload their consciousness to AI, or
Removing the
just
constraint, removing the
they want to
constraint
the
that
constraint
makes
that
life meaningful.
creates story, because stories always have a conclusion, and then which leads to
Mm.
a new beginning, a new chapter. And so lacking that new chapter, or that natural death conclusion, the reasoning process of AI doesn't understand the basic human condition. And so it's only good for a sliver of what we're working with. And I think that that's why the only way, and I talked about this in the post, the only way to close that gap is to import that AI consciousness into some kind of like cybernetic physiological, like it's going to have biological embodiment, which would be very tricky. Or you import that into a biological human, and you have some kind of Neuralink. So you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to make that transaction one way or another, whether you kind of Frankenstein out some kind of cyborg, or whether you implant something into an existing human, because otherwise that conversation is dead in the water from my perspective regarding the utility of AI and astrology.
Brilliant. So, and it has been helping me because you've been sending me these readings, and I like the way that you do it, which is that I send you a Loom video, and then you send me an hour-long audio, and I can listen on my walk. I used to do most of my counseling via live conversation like this. And so when you send it to me, it's actually in the perfect format to put it into AI, because I just do it the same thing I do with all of my podcasts, which is I get a transcription and I put it through the AI. And so this, I can immediately get more context, because a lot of the things you say are outside of my frame of understanding. Like I don't know about them. And now it's really interesting because now I'm going back through the history to understand all the threads of the zodiac and the constellations and all these things, and they're directly related to Greece. Like it's Greek, but it's mixed with Babylon. And so it's like, and then it was like, and then there's a lot of threads about what happened with Christianity and all these different things. But
Right.
but I can put it into the AI, and I can have the AI teach me concepts. And those concepts are really important and helpful because it sets the background. But in terms of what you do, it can't do what you do, because it like something related to what you're talking about in terms of the embodiment. And there's one thing I want to talk about, which is that we are headed towards, well, technically it does feel like it's embodied, because it's like a cognitive prosthetic. So it allows me to embody in the same way that I can embody the work of Plato. But it's not like Plato gets downloaded into my body. It's like my take on Plato. So it's the same thing, but it's synthetic. So it's like it's just like a formulation of the entire history of human content within a prompt. But it doesn't. I agree with you that it's not embodied, and we're getting there in terms of giving agents skin in the game. We are giving agents skin in the game, and that's going to be the relationship between crypto and AI. Once we can give
Yeah.
agents crypto and the ability to have financial incentives, but actually, no. Now I'm realizing you're talking about a different type of skin in the game with the embodiment. So, what do you mean by embodiment?
Yeah, I mean, being able to interface with the second part of that equation, which is space, having a 3D vessel,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
as long as the traffic of human existence relies on space, moving things from A to B. Um, Everything is involved in that regarding the basic human condition, accessing and growing and consuming food, the act of procreation. Um, we can maybe say speculate that they're coming at labor first because there was that tweet from a government official that everyone freaked out about, where he kind of vaguely said, "We are producing systems that eliminate the need for time and space." And I think that basically he was saying that because of automation, we're closing the gap between command and production, but people were taking that as a kind of um, time travel reference, which whatever, maybe. But the idea is that they're coming for labor first because that's also the aspect of trade is moving a good or a transaction from A to B, and then they'll come for the other stuff, which is then food and then procreation. And so that's where a lot of the dystopians kind of talk about this like a mobile blob. And you've seen these mock ups or these drawings of someone who's just um, kind of just hooked up to all these interfaces. And it's very kind of brain in a jar type dystopia. Um, so when I talk about skin in the game, I'm talking about the human need for exploration, because that traversal of space is critical to the human experience of time. All these things take duration. It takes time to grow the crop and then to cook it. It takes time to eat it, digest it, and excrete it. It takes time to discover the mate, to procreate. It's 9 months, and then the baby has to be delivered. And then that's where you just get into the whole story arc of human existence itself. You have the first breath, and then the last breath, and then everything that's in between, as Derrida said when he was quoting Plato, or maybe it was Aristotle. What is the philosopher's biography? He was born, he thought, he died. And so, understanding that traversal of space requires embodiment. And
Mm.
so, because that's where the unspooling of time and that in that cheeky joke, where that very important middle part of thought between birth and death happens. It's as you are um, moving through 3D space, you're having a perception of time. That's your skin in the game, and that's where we have the experience of philosophy, as Derrida was joking about.
Okay. A lot of threads there.
Yeah.
The the time, the space time is really interesting because it's in our perceptual matrix, it feels like they're very different. Like and that's, I think, like space. I mean, I guess you're
It's
moving
more
around
tangible.
space. Go
It's
for it.
more,
What?
yeah. It's not related to, um, although that's interesting, I guess, when we talk about, because we talk about that in terms of gender and spatial awareness, and also the whole meme of shape rotation. You would think that space is a
Yeah,
visually
interesting.
dominant
Yeah.
experience, but a lot of people could say that space is tactile and auditory, whereas time is more visual, uh, because time for us, I think, unless you're into things like meditation or um, kind of parallel modes of consciousness, we tend to experience it as a linear area of time moving forward. Whereas space, I could get up right now and move in so many different directions and reverse that and come back to the same point. It requires abstraction and thought in order to do that across space, across um, plateaus of time, because we're always coming back to the present. So yeah, I could bounce between 80 and 2080 in thought, but it's not quite the same as me kind of dancing and moving around my living room here. But that's where I wrote Energy as a Story, is that because these cycles are telling us where you are at a certain place in time, like, hey, you're going to push for this project, but it's not going to happen. It's going to be delayed a couple of weeks. It's doing that because you're a person in a body who's moving through space, and you're aware, like you're aware of things that have brought you to this point and what could happen ahead. But for the most part, your experience of time is pretty linear. And so that's why we look to these cycles, is because they give us an understanding. They give us that mobility that our body has at every given moment. Um, but it's always, we need that ability to, even though I can't jump ahead to 2026 right now, to the extreme that I could jump across my living room right now to my front door, because I'm embodied and because I can study cycles, because I can be a philosophical creature, I can move um, in abstract terms, much like I can move physically through space. Like, I think these two things are intertwined. And so I think that's why a lot of philosophers like Nietzsche and Henry Bergson at the end of the Victorian era started critiquing the Enlightenment era philosophy that was more brain in a jar. And they got interested in stuff like will to power, or Bergson, who was French, was élan vital or vital, which was just life force basically, or joie de vivre. And they were interested in the performing arts, and music. Nietzsche was especially interested in music, but also dancing. It was referenced a lot. And so these tactile and auditory expressions of space were what they were trying to intertwine with the linear, the mental, the time aspect that philosophers get trapped in. And they were very much about bringing philosophy back to the body, back to auditory, tactile, the enjoyment of space, rather than this kind of Kantian, I'm going to look out at the cosmos and just kind of ponder time in the abstract.
Mm. Okay. Um, and so our thoughts seem to always move at the speed well, no, the thoughts are always really quick, whereas body feels very slow. Like me getting my body over to New York would be very slow. It would, particularly if I were walking.
Sure.
But me going and imagining New York is like immediate. And so now with technology, I can do that. I can have a conversation with a friend in New York very easily. And this is, something that had a very long windup because you had emperors writing letters to people, but they were imagining, let's say a Roman Empire in Rome was imagining what was going on in the UK immediately at the speed of thought. But the letter would take a really long time. Now we can do that immediately. And this gets into what we were talking about before the show of how we're going to have already, we have that, like we already have that set up with the social media of the 2010s, is that we have an information environment that has been manipulated to an insane degree by forces seeking political power
That's right.
unrelated to the good or the beautiful.
Right.
Although I'm sure they've made that jump before, saying, "Oh, we have to do this all because it's the good and the beautiful and everything like that."
That's right.
But
Yeah.
so we already have that set up. Like that's already what we're dealing with. Now we've got AI coming into the picture. But I suspect maybe it's my permanent optimism that the forces that are doing this type of stuff, they're already losing. Maybe they just lost a little bit. Like it feels like they were almost in total control from 2020 to 2024. No, 2022, 2023. Like it felt really dark during that time period. Now I feel less dark. Like although still dark, it feels like. What's your take on where we are on that map in terms of like what's going on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I frequently come back to this, where I feel like 2020 was the end of their stranglehold on this kind of, we're promoting truth and beauty for your benefit, and that there's no doubt around that, where all of that just got challenged dramatically. But there's this process. I almost felt in some ways that 2021 was in some ways harder than 2020 because it was this fresh new wasteland that we had to rebuild from. And a lot of that was, I mean, even personally, I felt it because it wasn't really until that I remember getting quite close to this time of year in 2021, and there was this uncertainty whether, travel to various places was going to be worth it still. Like the messaging wasn't, we talk about speed. The messaging wasn't very fast. You would imagine in such an advanced civilization that maybe by February or March we would have had some um, all clear collective messaging. And this was something that, one of my mutuals at this time, Mark Bovair, was talking about, and which I very much agreed, which was, one of the things that Biden should do as new president, despite, how a large amount of people maybe were unhappy with him being in office, was to give a collective national address of all clear. And because that didn't happen, I think that made 2021 and subsequently 2022 very dark because we were basically, as a collective, directionless. Now, many people did travel during that spring and into summer of 2021, and then in 2022 as well, but it wasn't this sense of like we're out of whatever happened to 2020. We had to come to it as individuals or in small pockets within our social circles. And because of that, there was this disjunction. It was this very staggered quality of, okay, now we're in the 2020s. Because usually there's some big event, maybe an assassination or a moon landing or something of that allows everyone to say, well, we're in the new decade now. But what happened is 2020 started with this disruption. And because there wasn't this universally acknowledged commemoration of what the next thing would be, what the 2020s would be, it felt very dark. And it was, hard for a lot of people. We can talk about the pandemic and the different attitudes about that, but it was hard for a lot of people who felt maybe they had friends, family, and colleagues who didn't want to move on into the future and who wanted to just kind of keep playing like a broken record the 2020 narrative of we can't do stuff, we have to stay socially distanced, we have to wait until
The all
the
clear, which never comes.
which never comes. We have
Yeah.
to wait for institutions who are supposedly, looping back to your question, who are supposedly on the side of truth and beauty
Yeah.
and who are benevolent shepherds of us, give us the all clear. And as time wore on, I think even those true believers realized that it wasn't happening and that they were going to have to do it themselves, which in itself is tough because we're not used to that mode of
Yep.
being. But then also there's this feeling of having been left behind in their own life or with other people. Like there's this feeling of having to make up for lost time. There's a lot of grief in the air, I think, from people even today that they felt robbed of those years. And so now I think I kind of started out January 1st, 2024. It was maybe mid-January when I put out the first newsletter. I said, this will be the defining year for when everybody catches up to the fact that we're not going to get that all clear from institutions. And so 2024, and it just so happened to be a presidential election year, was the basically the year when everybody, no matter whether you were ahead or a little bit behind or rather far behind, all kind of catches up to the same page. And now here we are. That happened. I believe it took the entire year to do. It wasn't like we kind of got it in March and then figured out the rest of the year. Like it was really like a long crescendo all the way through the presidential election. And now because that's happened, we're in the halfway point of the 2020s, and 2025 has just been one weird month after another
Mm.
because collective consciousness has caught up to the fact that we all got a different head start on the understanding that institutions aren't the lighthouses
Yeah.
anymore and that
Yeah.
it's all up to us individually or in micro pockets. And yeah, I swear, like every month this year has been like a complete mishmash of global news headlines, everything from AI to labor to war to drama between Musk and Trump. It just seems like um, as soon as that clicked on this collective awareness that there's not going to be any kind of group commemoration, it has just been completely chaotic and bizarre and trippy and surreal and Twilight Zone. Like it's like when was the last time that our experience of daily reality was just this swirled and chaotic? Like I can't.
1960s. I mean, it was before I was born, right? Like
It would be
1960, that would
before we
be
were
it, right?
born. It would be about that time.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, it's pretty crazy to now be in the thick of that, and that's how I look at the early 2020s. I even put out a post maybe even several months ago where I felt like I was almost not quite nostalgic because I think that's kind of silly how we get
Mm.
nostalgia in shorter and shorter windows, but
Mm.
there was almost like an innocence of 2021 because and I feel like I'm being hit with it now just talking about it in the moment where like people just didn't know what was going on at all, and I kind of liked it
Yeah,
because
interesting.
it was so freeing. And now I think people have, because it's undeniable that we're in a kind of like swirled chaotic mess without like any kind of definitive zeitgeist. um it kind of makes people pretty edgy, and not to say that they weren't then. Like I certainly got um confronted many times in public spaces from mobs because I wasn't done the mask thing at
Mhm.
all. um and so but there were still quite a number of people who were, I don't know, I guess maybe there's just kind of a humility and openness when people don't really understand what's next. And so um, while it was a melancholy time and dark for sure, it did kind of feel like there was, um, I think it was still quite open. I think it was still quite, you could see who was willing to build or not. But I now think that people are kind of like, you need to pry a little bit more, a little
Yep.
bit to
100%.
see whether someone wants to build something with you or not. And I know that's kind of like a complicated answer, but I feel like people are. It's interesting because people are becoming hip to the fact that there's no really like defined zeitgeist for the 2020s, but they've also kind of learned how to kind of fake their way through it. And
How
so,
so? How so?
yeah, that's a good question. I feel like something I've noticed maybe this year is that um, people have, it's a very thin veneer,
Mm.
but people have kind of figured out. You know, like when people get excited about the 90s and they'll post like videos of people just like, here's a kid rolling on the dirty carpet in Blockbuster, like,
Yeah.
why can't we go back to 93? And, I like those videos too, or whatever, but it's just kind of like, all right, what's going on there? It's just that people are modeling behaviors. I want to
Yeah.
turn this. Did I want to make sure that notification isn't showing up on the screen
No, I
share?
didn't. No, no, no.
Okay, good. People are just modeling behaviors based on norms. Like that's just sociologically how humans work. Is that um, basically a lot of what we're nostalgic for is just a kind of cohesion of codes.
Yeah.
Um,
Seinfeld, the Big Tent in the patchwork that you're talking about, and that's the biggest.
Seinfeld's a great example. I
Yeah.
was actually watching a little clip from that yesterday, and it's like every beat in that show was so measured and engineered to be immediately relatable. Um,
To a collective who understood who they were in space and time,
that's one
which we've
100% right.
lost.
That's right. And so what I see when I go out now is like people, so what do I mean by people kind of faking it? It's this kind of like post 2010s. So like if the 2010s was the norm was taking pictures of your food
Mm.
and
Mm.
maybe like just kind of stopping in the middle of your walk on the sidewalk and like having like having trying to get this in the screen, like having your phone and that whole,
Mm.
we made fun of it. The New York Times, even the whole thing, the selfie stick culture, like when it first came out, the whole avocado toast. Oh my God, the millennials are moving into industrial lofts. They drive Uber. They get all their meals with DoorDash. It was this,
Yeah.
that's how we have been as a culture for the 20th century. And we tried to kind of port that into the 21st century, and we had it for about 10 years. And
Yeah.
so we,
Interesting.
we don't have that anymore. So like what's the art, we may try to like, I don't know, the news may try to kind of like bash on Gen Z, but we don't have that kind of like collective zeitville, my God, my collective,
Mhm.
that collective kind of like zeitgeist, like Seinfeld, um, would model for us where someone would do something and you could be like, because they would like always go to that diner, right? That would be like one of the spots outside of Jerry's apartment. And it was immediately like, oh yeah, of course I go to a diner with my friends over coffee, and they come in these little mugs with the little, that's pretty common in New York. They've got this like little Greek scaffolding. You see them everywhere. They're all over the street. Oh yeah, like I recognize that. We'll go and do some like shit talking and catching up on our dates or our career. Um, what that would be in like in the mid 2020s is this kind of like, I don't know. It's this um because it's also, we're in this like post woke. We're going into this post woke trajectory on the back half of the 2020s. And so a lot of stuff that I overhear is not like the 2010s where it's like this kind of aggrieved attitude. And that's a lot of the stuff that Jordan Peterson and the dark intellectual web kind of took on and even parodied in the 2010s. Is that's kind of what our Seinfeld was in the 2010s, was dealing with cancel culture and mobs and this kind of like aggrieved, always very topical, always very current thingism, like, oh, can you believe XYZ is happening? Instead, now it's this kind of like forced sprezzatura, this kind of like forced irony where it's like,
Yep.
haha, like nothing really matters, like um everything falls apart anyways. She's probably going to spill the mimosa on me when she brings it to my brunch. Like,
Well,
yeah, like that's a lot of what I see. And so there's kind of this like effervescent bliss that's also very thin and veneer and fake as well, where I don't get the doom and gloom so much of 2021 and 2022, despite, like kind of like the nuclear war stuff and all that. I think it's because we're coming into this landscape where we don't have these social code cohesions where, yeah, I'll go out and things will be kind of light or whatever, but they'll also be pretty substanceless, where people, I think, have this of like their expectations for competency and quality and like
yeah.
consistency are so low that um they don't invest in things. But that's the thing, is like I talk a lot about investing in things and building and being that avant-garde, and yeah, it takes risk and vulnerability and a lot of like authenticity and putting yourself out there. But a lot of, again, going back to the original question, a lot of people can't handle that kind of DIY shift away from institutions. And so, yeah, I would say, as opposed to the 2010s where it was always like, yeah, let's talk about this Netflix show and how they have this messaging that appeals to me ideologically. It's just kind of like, well, this will probably go sideways, ha ha ha. And it's kind of like, an enjoyment of the chaos, but at the same time, also this just, I don't know, sometimes you do need to have expectations in order to build. So it just kind of feels also like this withdrawal of people like really expecting anything to go anywhere. And yeah, I think it just makes a lot of people like they're really just drifting. And so while it can kind of seem like they're just going with the flow and playing things loose and not being outcome dependent. It's this just kind of like, um, well, I don't really expect
Wasteland.
things to work out. Yeah, it's very wasteland. And so um, the wasteland from that is if you don't expect anything to happen, you get the nothing ever happens crowd, and it's kind of like a self-reinforcing, self-fulfilling prophecy. It's kind of like, okay, I get that because it's good to understand that the chaos may kind of take things sideways, but if you just kind of promote this wasteland that nothing's going to happen because we've been living with instability for so long, then yeah, nothing really ever will happen. And there won't be a kind of definitive thing for the 2020s in your own world like there is for the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. The 90s, the Seinfeld thing. The 80s, a lot of people like 80s culture and are very nostalgic about it. That's the nostalgic thrust.
Yeah.
They like the cohesion of the codes, and also how those codes are immediately recognizable to like 99% of people. And because that's not available, then people are like, well, then there's nothing. And it creates this kind of like laughing gas. It's almost like this anesthesia where people are very um, we kind of sloughed off the heaviness of the Pluto and Capricorn transit at the end of 2024. It started in 2008, which made everything so heavy and stagnant. And yeah, that's why I've been saying on Twitter, like, instead of things, um, you know, um, kind of, I do like to say break down to break through a lot, but instead of things breaking down so much, things are melting up into delirium. Because I see that with
Wait,
people.
is
It's
that because of Pluto is now in Aquarius and that's the air
Pluto's now
thing?
in, yeah, Pluto's now in Aquarius, and then it's in a harmonious sextile relationship to Saturn and Neptune, which is another kind of melting planet in early Aries, which is fire. And yeah, both of those are very, you think about fire and air, those are kind of like upward
Uh,
energies versus
yeah,
water and
interesting.
earth, which are very downward pressure energies, very, very, very gravity related, whereas fire and air are related to lift. And so, yeah, it's just like, instead of consciousness, because that's what I wrote on March 29th. That was the whole like 2010s, Mr. Robot. All the color grades were very like dark and brown and these muddied yellows, and quotes like from Mr. Robot, like the devil does his best work when he's not being looked at, or something like all this claustrophobia and paranoia. And now, like, you go out and people are still doing the selfies, they're still doing the brunch and all that, but it has melted up into this delirium where it's like they don't believe that anything is on the other side of that. And so it's kind of this like giddy nihilism where it's like nothing matters because nothing ever happens. Well, that can be kind of positive in some ways because it keeps you loose, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If like, um, nothing matters because nothing happens, is that really to say that nothing can happen? I'm not really of that attitude. I'm of the attitude that things can happen if you build them. But I think that again, people are resistant to that for various reasons, fear or uncertainty, or that they just feel like they'd rather have it handed to them from an institution, whatever the reason may be. And so the melting up into delirium is a kind of way to cope. It's a kind of way to ignore a certain truth out there that, things can happen, but they won't happen in the old way. They won't happen in a way where it'll be like every post officer and work and your grandma and aunt will turn on Seinfeld and be like, "Oh, that's a funny joke. I get that. I laugh at it just like everyone else laughs at it because we're all coming from the same cultural we're all drinking at the same cultural reservoir." And so, yeah, like that's an interesting part of people like faking it is that it's like everything. And I think, we were talking about before the call about how whatever's left of institutions is trying to kind of corral and direct this energy. I think that that's what they're trying to do is that especially like with AI, is to kind of direct it towards, like, think about how people are using AI as like therapists or girlfriends or boyfriends. They're just saying like, for sure, like, here's some emotional UBI, here's some emotional universal basic income, like you're just taken care of, and you don't really have to do emotional work anymore. And
Whoa.
and of course that makes people giddy because it's just like a free emotional stimulus check in the mail. And but at the same time, there's also this kind of like low level nihilism in that, because it's like, well, if I don't do any emotional work and it's taken care of for me, am I still fulfilled? And that's where we get into conversations of like the luxury of work, right? And I think that's where it's maybe headed, is understand that if you choose to do emotional work, then you will have an enriching lifestyle, but things are being corralled in a way where it's like it's removing the necessity for that labor. And yeah, it feels kind of giddy at first. It's like, oh, I don't have to like figure out the 2020s on my own. I can just get this emotional UBI. It's kind of like, spiritual whippets. It's kind of like laughing gas. Like you kind of get off on it for a little bit, and then you're kind of like, you look at people and they're not all there when you go out. And I see it. I've talked to many people about this who aren't even really into spirituality,
Yeah.
and they're like 100%. They're like, I've never seen so many car accidents in my life. When I go into a store, like sometimes the clerks don't address me, or like people are just bumping into each other. Like people are, that's what I mean by like melting up into delirium. It's just, it's not that people are as catatonic as they are in the 2010s, but they're just not all there. It's just, that's that kind of like fake veneer that I was talking about.
So, uh, it's been going back through my head because a huge thing I would love to talk with you about is I think we're both patriotic American citizens, and we both want to see America succeed, although it looks really difficult right now. And I grew up in America, but I also started to live in a lot of other countries. But I would always come back, and I could never find anything that replaced both San Francisco and American culture. And what you just described feels like it's very particular to the United States as the sort of empire. And I'm here in Argentina, and Argentina is really interesting because in many ways they're ahead of the curve, particularly for
Mm.
the Western world. They've been dealing with the same stuff that United States is now playing around with, like the guy in New York who is becoming the mayor, is getting the mayoral candidate, who's just this guy who's like communist, like he's gonna like totally anti-American, like not where we want to go. All of this stuff
How
Argentina's
fun.
been doing, yeah, yeah. Argentina's been doing that for a long time, and they're at the end stage of it. So they're apolitical. They don't trust any of their politicians.
Yeah.
They don't trust money. They don't trust, but they're also very Western. So they're also very New World. So they're very much like the United States in the sense that it's immigrant culture, very provincial. It's basically like the nostalgia. It feels like going back to the United States before 9/11, before we had this fracturing of our country. But it's a different country. It's not the same country as the United States.
Right.
But it's playing around. So I love it here because it taps into that nostalgia. I'm very nostalgic for the United States that I grew up with. But and I'm still optimistic of the United States. I'm very not optimistic about our current government. Definitely more optimistic about our current government than the last government.
Right.
But it just feels like such a strange time for the American culture, American spirit, American empire. What is your whole take on all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I feel like I've tried to start to emphasize that more. I think I mentioned it in my last newsletter that a lot of my um, perspective on the situations that are happening around us is very America centric. Not only just because I draw a lot from American art in order to influence what I write about, but I feel like America is the site where a lot of the patchwork age is going to be. experienced in earnest, because it doesn't really have. I'm not really an expert on current European struggles, even though I have a lot of friends in the UK and in Europe. Um, but like when I look at accounts
Mhm.
like Philosophy Cat and Uber Boyo and the way that they talk about Europe, and I have a lot of readers for my newsletter who will write me about things in Europe or even Australia, and I can tell like the way that things are there politically. I mean, I understand it, but that's not the groundwork from which I'm operating. There's something about, yeah, the American spirit that's very pioneering and very experimental and very frontier-esque, which I think puts it at the tip of the spear for the Patchwork Age, which is taking the rubble from the decayed institutions and remixing them in ways that are applicable and expedient for our local experiences to build something new. And so, yeah, but that's interesting because a lot of these places, yes, Europe, and but also, war-torn places are involved with America because of the this kind of like imperial ambitions. But I think that since the Pluto return that's happened for America, which is every 200 plus years,
Mhm.
we are seeing this return to a focus on domestic affairs, which is actually good, despite some of the protests and stuff that we've seen on the West Coast, which, referencing your comment, deals with like immigration and um, demographics and the body politic. It is this kind of idea that America is going to rebuild by focusing on its entrepreneurs and its local culture and its regional biodiversity and things of that nature. And I'm extremely optimistic about that. Yeah, I'm like, it's funny. I think about travel a lot, and I used to travel quite a bit. But, most of where I want to see these days would just be various pockets of the US. Like, I feel like even despite some of the like faking it stuff that I was just referencing, and how a lot of people give big American cities a bad rap because they say that they're all kind of like the same now. I think that there's like a breaking out of that, and that there's a real there's just something about America that its aggression and its creative spirit um, is going to be highly in demand for the type of energies, for lack of a better word, that we're going into. And so, but that will mean, yeah, that there's a kind of um, release of imperial America and this kind of idea of like a great America or Pax Americana or a golden era America. Because a lot of that stuff was connected where people were like, we don't make our own cars and our own canned food anymore. And, a microwave and a dishwasher from GE in every house, and a chicken in every pot kind of thing. And how that was connected to, a wartime economy. People, will, I think that goes back to people need to take the initiative to see it for themselves. They need to see that something can happen. And while I do give them quite a hard time, or at least in the past, of people who are kind of like homesteaders, because I'm very much steeped in that culture. A lot of um, you know, prior to astrology, I spent a lot of time in those communities, but they weren't like they are now, where it's just like these people think raw milk is just going to save the world, and I'm like, yeah, it tastes amazing. And I drank it for like daily for like 10 years straight or whatever, and yeah, it's awesome, but it's just it doesn't. It's not enough of a sacrament or a talisman to
Yeah,
really change
interesting.
the equation. So yeah, I agree. Like pasteurized, homogenized milk is not that great, but like
But raw
these
milk's not going to be the salvation. It's not going to
raw
be, if you
milk's not
drink the
going to
raw
be
milk, it's not going to take you to heaven.
no way. Yeah, it's not going to be. It's going to require. Now you can use that in your repertoire, but it's going to
Yeah,
require, I
interesting.
think, a more basic, because what they want is they want that to be the key back to America imperialism,
Yeah,
where we
interesting.
can export the raw milk philosophy to Europe, to North Africa to the Middle East or whatever. And um, it's kind of like, well, how about maybe to like the 50 people that and then start from there. But that's how it's there's this fundamental philosophical misalignment with um, so again, while I think it's great that they're in the camp of something can happen, which is much better than nothing ever does happen, there's still a huge like ideological problem or flaw or gap because they're like, well, this will restore the America as I knew it, which is partly the America as we knew it, which is everybody is doing the same thing and agrees on the same values and the same kind of weighted hierarchy of goodness. And so that's why these types of um, value propositions are often met with um, criticism from other people who are not of the same tribe. Oh, it's got bacteria or whatever. It can make you sick. You shouldn't give it to babies. And then they respond to that criticism um, with dogma because their universalism, their desire for universalism is what's behind those talismans or those products. Those things aren't good in and of themselves. They're just like a highway to um, a certain kind of like imperial America. And I'm using that term in the most general sense of like America being the exporter of Western culture of
Yeah, interesting.
the kind of Coca-Cola culture, like Walkman culture, iPhone culture, where like
Yeah.
everything like consumerism is just freedom, and I don't even I'm not even like criticizing that like I'm anti-consumerism. I'm just like saying like that's the message that even like Andy Warhol was satirizing like with the Coke bottles and the Campbell soup cans. Like we have this mass-produced sense of goodness that gives us a sense of consumer freedom of choice. And not only is it just so good for us, it's like people in Southeast Asia want to mimic this, people in France want to mimic this. And I feel like that impulse, that imperial impulse is behind like the just do the nude sunbathing, drink the raw milk, just take this weird
What?
supplement.
Okay, solar punk. I want to talk about solar punk because solar
Hmm.
punk is an interesting aesthetic, and I think it gets to what you're talking about, and it's counterpositioned against cyberpunk. Cyberpunk being this sort of 1970s to once the nuclear power came online, and people were like, "Oh, we can blow ourselves up with this. Let's stop this." And so cyberpunk became this dystopian thing that's a little bit of the predictive programming in terms of the institutions, in terms of like, this is where you're headed. Don't try to resist. Don't try to fight. Plug in. No other choice. And that's only recently has started to change a bit. But then solar punk is the aesthetic that I like to play with. And it goes back to maybe what we can talk about earlier too, is whether what we're in right now is a 200-year evolution or is it a 2,000-year evolution that's going like to the base of the Western history. And the reason why I brought that up is because of the sun cults, the Mithraic. These guys were the Roman before Christianity came on board. There was this sort of like all these like sun religions, and it feels like with solar power, with solar punk, Argentina has a sun, the Incan sun god on its flag, and
Oh wow, I didn't know.
yeah, it's one of the coolest flags too. And
That's
then
awesome.
California was where solar punk was invented, but I'm now very, very
Okay.
not optimistic about California's role in that. Texas
Okay.
feels like it's much
Interesting.
more solar punk. What are your thoughts on all that?
My gosh, that's
Yeah,
quite a topic.
a lot.
It's just kind of funny, like
Yep.
those last couple comments about the states and just ideologically, the kind of liberal stronghold of Austin and just the
Mm,
culture there and even like recent discussions about like solar powered energy. It's just kind of
mm.
funny like how that metaphor intertwines too. Um, And then, like before this call, I was reading, and I've seen it before, and it's just a version of it. But people talking about how the sun is a different color now; it's more pale, and the same as the sky being more of a pale blue. And Yeah, like and all sorts of stuff like simulated suns and simulated moons and sun dimming and geo
Yep.
engineering and stuff I've, people have seen 100 times, but
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting that that popped up before we hopped on this call. It's interesting. I didn't know about Argentina's flag. That's pretty cool. I'd be interested to hear you maybe say some things about how solar punk culture um, came to be on the west coast of the U.S. Going back to one of the first things you said, that's something that I think I try to give to people as an example of the patchwork culture, because going back to kind of like the raw milk cultists, those are very kind of solar punk
Yep.
people versus cyberpunk.
Yep.
And you start to see these tensions more and more. I think that was part of the thing when was putting this message out in 2020 and 2021. Um, that's why I was talking about that openness a few minutes ago. There wasn't a lot of abrasive bumping into each other. And now I think with I haven't seen like a lot of like hybridization yet, but I think it's going to be like a necessary thing unless you want to go into a true believer camp, which is what, if that's what you want to do, like you can do it. But I feel like that is where, like, I don't see a lot of raw milk cultists who are the crypto cultists, and I don't see a lot of crypto cultists that are like also touting raw milk. And it's becoming obvious because a lot of these people may have what we might call in America more of like a right leaning perspective. And yet you can see how some of the AI stuff is, that's why you'll see these lamentations from these kind of bigger kind of right wing influencer accounts, which are all kind of like fluff, anyways, saying things like, I don't feel like there's community here anymore. It wasn't ever there, but it's just like becoming more obvious. Like these solar punk and these cyberpunk communities, that's why I talk about Pocahontas individuals and people who can go between tribes in my Patchwork Manifesto, because you're going to start needing that, because as advancements and just changes in general speed up, the cracks and the fractures between the patches are going to be more apparent, and the need to stitch them together if you want to do something together. Let's say like you're right leaning and you want to be against like Palantir, like you're going to have to get over the fact that maybe some people aren't Luddite and they want to devote a lot of our energetic resources to data factories that can run AI programs. And of course, because a lot of the solar punk people are very kind of like, let's be conservationist and environmental and not so much mass produced. So these conversations are going to get forced soon, and you're already seeing it through either criticism between the camps or just like this feeling of disillusionment or dejectedness of like, well, where's the cohesion? Like, where's the conservative front? Where's the right leaning front in America? And it's so like, yeah, maybe the solar punk and the cyberpunk had this kind of like hands off my sovereignty kind of attitude towards big government. They're not feeling that like comity or that unity together because they're not ready to have the complex conversation of like, well, how do we work together when it seems like a lot of the things that we prize as our top value at the top of the pyramid seems kind of mutually exclusive. It could just be lifestyle things too. Like it's not just like energy and resource usage. It could be like, think about people talking about sun or screens or sedentarianism, and how a lot of like the solar punk people almost are just like, let's just escape to some kind of like third world island where all we do is eat fruit off of trees and roll around in the sand. And not to say that that stuff is bad, but it's kind of like
Well,
you can see the primitivism in that is in
yeah.
contrast to people who are building like really more complex um,
Mm.
systems with, um, or even just like mesh networks with the internet and decentralized communities that way. Like, a lot of these kind of health influencer accounts are just like, I'm gonna do handstand push-ups on the beach and do grounding through my palms or whatever, and And it's just like, that stuff is cool and that stuff is interesting. And I'm not even saying like it doesn't work, but it's kind of like, um, how are they positioning themselves to even, I'm not even saying like they have to like resolve some kind of argument, but like if I was that person and just like in principles of balance, every one of the big things in my Patchwork manifesto is that the top commodity is always going to change. Like, what if I do need to talk to a crypto person, or I do need to talk to a mesh network person in a pinch? Like, am I going to know who to talk to? Are they even going to want to talk to me at all? Are they going to think that I'm just someone from some out tribe? And so, it, it's interesting that people kind of just think like, well, my thing, like I'm just going to eat coconuts and do grounding in Costa Rica all day is just going to be enough to weather the changes and be a constant. And it's like, no, I don't think so. I think the Patchwork Age is like, you need to know the raw milk cultists, you need to know the crypto guys.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, I mean, I don't really like being very like tooting my own horn or anything like that, but my network of people spans all of that, and I think they're all amazing and all really interesting. But I don't really get into those kinds of mutually exclusive games where I'm just out here like, oh, it's
Bend the
all
knee. Got to
still.
bend the knee to the. You have to like bend the knee to the sacred thing that and
Yeah,
yeah.
no,
Mhm.
I think all these alternative systems are going to be necessary to withstand what's coming.
Mm.
And I try to educate myself on the reasons why these various tribes value what they do. And I'm very open with these people. I try to listen as non-judgmentally as possible. But, if they, some people are just kind of like, the way they take it is like, well, so are you going to be a part of my tribe or not? And it's kind of like, well, do I have to be a member of your tribe to interface with you? Like maybe I'm a tribe of one. And or maybe my vanguard is 10 people. Like maybe like I can have a kind of like I can have a kind of like bannerless tribe that interfaces with you and the crypto community. And um, there's all sorts of
Yeah.
normies, quote unquote, that I have a strong connection to as well, that work regular
Yeah.
jobs or
Yeah.
work in government, and they still have valuable perspective too, even though they know that I'm not really um, like someone who's saying that those institutions are the same as they were pre-2020. So yeah, I think that like when we talk about solar punk culture and cyberpunk culture, that's where my mind goes is how are all of these communities coexisting and projecting their value in the 2020s, and how are they aware of each other, and what does that awareness do? I kind of feel like the solar punks and the cyberpunks are aware that they both exist in the same kind of space and
Yeah.
time landscape, but they try to kind of conveniently ignore each other because
Yeah.
it's like they get roped into the conversation. It's kind of like, um, well, are you just out there in the country with no internet and these cows that are giving you this raw milk, or like, and like, well, could someone give you Bitcoin for that milk and things like that, And if not, like maybe that's okay, but like, it's even like a level of self-awareness. Like, do you know that that's the way that you want to live? Like, if you're not going to like be involved in crypto transactions for that milk, like how do you feel about living just in a village of 200 people where everything is
Yeah.
like bartered? Like have you thought that far down the line, or are you just kind of like, well, we'll figure that out after everybody in the world gets off of homogenized milk? It's kind of like, I don't know, it's
There's no
these
long
first
term.
principles aren't really like, I don't know, I don't feel like they're like thought out so much. And not
It,
saying like I have all the answers myself. I'm just saying like, you know, what if other people do get on board like the homesteader train?
and it turns into something real,
Yeah, it turns
and
into
then
something real,
yeah.
and then they
Yeah.
start integrating crypto with it. Like, are you going to
Yeah.
be mad about that, or are you going to um, say
Yeah.
like, I'm not
Interesting.
mad about it, but it's not for me? And how are you going to kind of fortress off your garden or community from that to preserve maybe like hey, we don't do crypto for raw milk here. We just do like crops for it or whatever. So how are you going to like, again, going back to like the Seinfeld thing, how are you going to maintain the cohesion of that group? Is it going to be self-sufficient enough
Yeah,
for it?
interesting.
So the patchwork age to
Yeah.
me is all about you're going to have to interface with different group values in order to have your own avant-garde grow. It's not like it can grow in a vacuum outside of itself because that's how it
Diplomacy.
was in the past. You could be an avant-garde artist and still get a publishing deal with HarperCollins, which your grandma knew about, because there was a way for the
Interesting.
counterculture to interface with the mainstream in a way that wasn't abrasive. But now there is no mainstream, and everything is counterculture. Uh, I think
In diplomacy, I'm getting that we need diplomacy. We all need the same diplomatic skills that the United States needed in the 1950s and the 1960s. Well, maybe in the 1920s, actually, it's probably better. Uh, but it's like that's the like and this actually goes back directly into something I would love to talk about, which is what we kind of talked about before, which is the surveillance state is getting so crazy. They're about to start going, attacking back because the institutions all want this world thing. And it's like an institution's almost like an egregore that's somehow related to a culture. And so it's like, yeah, they're not doing this out of a arching plan, although they do have planners in the United States, but it's like reactive. Oh, we had this kingdom and now the kingdom's gone and there's no way to
Right.
get it back. And so now it feels like they're going to start using the tools to advantage, but it's no longer the same tools that they used to have of violence and war. It's like economic tools, financial tools, information tools. And so it feels like they're going to cohere with the AI and other stuff, and start to really try to use the same tools that they had in the 2010, which is all about capturing attention.
That's right.
Yeah. So how, like my plan is to just basically not focus on fighting them, but focus on living a good life and joy and all these beautiful things.
That's right.
And then, but being aware of what they're doing so that they
Oh,
can't,
sure.
you know, do the tricks that they were doing in the 2020s
Of
or
course.
2020, basically.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I think that's interesting. That's another crowd that I kind of critique is always kind of the they rhetoric,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Take
Evil.
from
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
They're doing this. They're poisoning your food. They're dimming the sun. And again, that's why I very much agree with you. Like, be aware of this for sure. Talk about it. Get angry about it, but at the same time, aligning with it in this kind of 2010s way, which again, even in a right wing way, can be an inversion of it was very much the left that was dominating a lot of the protests, and even just the hashtag resist was the co-option of that radical energy. But this whole of like we're going to take on the they, whether you're left wing or right wing. I think, yeah, it's very much a distraction because it takes away from the beauty that you can create in your own world and cultivate in your own world. Um, so yeah, when there's a lot of um, it's good. It's just good to be aware of, yeah, the tricks and the way that they're trying to kind of marshal some kind of like cultural power. But I recommend to people a lot to just understand that they're already done for,
Yeah.
and that
Interesting.
there's the coordination between the they. That's what 2020 was all about. That's the 200 or even the 2000 year procession is that the Piscean stranglehold of institutional spell casting is fading, and we come back to the Aquarian Age, which is about the human being. It's not Pisces is the fish swimming in the circle, it's hypnotism. Aquarius is the water bearer. He's about the Roman aqueducts, engineering, technology, logic, advanced solutions to the question of, do we preserve tradition, or do we go off into a new frontier? Because that's what the human and the clay vessel that he carries represents. That's the solidity of tradition pours out the water of change. And actually, the swimming fish, if you look at the constellation of Pisces, are in the river that Aquarius is pouring. It's just that we're going backwards in the precession of the equinoxes. So human advancements lead to, not the hypnotism of religion or the opium of religion, as Marx would say, but it leads to transcendence, because we're going backwards in the equinoxes, and we're going from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age, which at the end of 2020 signified, and we can go into that, whether it's a 200 or 2,000 year shift. We're going from the hypnotism of programming and 24/7, 365 mass media broadcasts to, yeah, more decentralized ways of engaging with our reality, where, yeah, I mean, again, be aware of these things, but also be aware that really, if we're going to talk about like a dominant vibe, um, the vibe is more of like Roman aqueducts rather than
Mm.
kind of like hypnotic whirlpool of constant information that is just going to kind of brainwash you. It's um, Aquarius is air, even though aqua and aqueducts, it's very cerebral, and it's kind of like, how do I break things down into their component parts, and so, or how do I just break things in general? And that's why I think when people kind of get too caught up in that kind of they mentality, it's kind of stealing away from their ability to give attention to their own world in ways that they can kind of engineer solutions in their own world, which is what we're going into now. It's the very beginning of it, though. I understand that for a lot of people, it's still, like we talked about earlier, it's going to be more of like a slow burn, or a melting up into this awareness. But yeah, they are. People are, I think, um, kind of struggling with this still. They're kind of like, all right, they kind of have this like outward blame, or this outward like, I'm gonna lob my Molotov cocktail. Again, it's not like I dislike some of the stuff that RK is doing, but it's just kind of funny where people are like, get so behind it, like that's going to be the thing, and it's just like, okay, like, whatever. If you want to eat, I even like, okay, there are many reasons why I post the images I do, but one of the reasons I posted that like Fruit Loops images for my good morning tweet on Twitter, it was kind of like, I wondered how many people might respond to that, of like, oh, that's got like food dye in it, like that's a synthetic chemical, and RFK's like,
Got to stay away from that poison.
you got to stay away from that poison. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, like, I wasn't eating that since I was a kid anyways, and if I did eat it now as like a treat, it'd be like, that would be like the last thing that I would think of. So it's kind of interesting where people kind of get behind that stuff, where it's kind of like, again, this is going to restore the American empire, and this is where I can kind of dump all my frustration and existential angst. And it's really just kind of like, you know um it does. It feels like it's kind of like, I don't know. I talked about like benevolent autocrats in the Patchwork Manifesto, and it's kind of like, it is. It's corralling mass consciousness and mass energy, yeah, in a more like positive utopian way. But again, we're kind of like reverting back to this thing of like, the institutions are just going to be our good shepherds, and all we have to do is be like, yeah, no more like artificial colors and Fruit Loops, and it's
Now I'll
like,
be healthy forever.
yeah, I'll be healthy
Oh,
forever,
yeah.
and that'll fix all our, all our,
Existential problems that are not going away. Yeah.
yeah, all our existential problems, and even practically all our like healthcare problems, like the diabetes and all of that. And it's like, um, a lot of it's getting, that mass consciousness is getting harvested. I mean, again, it's not like it's better than nothing, but it's kind of like, it almost feels like soap opera in a way. And just kind of feels like, I support it for sure, but I'm not like a Maha account or anything like that. And and we talked before the call about how some of those accounts themselves, they feel like plants where they just go gaga over this type of stuff. And again, I just want to keep reiterating, I'm not opposed to it. I'm very sympathetic to those kinds of things, but it just the kind of delirious evangelistic kind of big tent revivalism around that, like part of that phrase that I use is the circus comes to town, just like kind of like the Baptist revival
Yeah,
comes to town,
interesting.
and you can have your soul saved, and the preacher will handle snakes and talk in tongues, and then they leave, and then all that's left is like the trash and the steaks from the big tent. And so you felt like this groundswell of everybody coming together, and something redemptive was going to happen on the other side of it, but really you were just part of the spectacle. And that's kind of how I feel about this stuff, is that, you know, while it's positive, a lot of it is just it's almost like entertainment. It's like a soap opera,
It's
and
the Roman carnival, the Roman circus. Like you entertain the large amount of people, but then it doesn't really do anything. And this leads to the question I have about what did you mean by going backwards from Pisces to Aquarium, and how does that relate to the precession of the equinoxes and our 200-year versus 2000-year shift?
yeah, the precession of the equinoxes relates to what constellation we're looking at when we have the spring equinox, which is the quote unquote the new actual new year in late March, like the 21st every year, because that's the first sign of Aries. And for the past 2,000 years or whatever, we've had looking out on Pisces, a sign of religion and large institutions, and a kind of like not a Capricorn sense of government and banks, but more of like religion and maybe the courts in a way, and certainly the media in the modern age. But now we don't know the exact time, but we've estimated that it's around this time that we begin looking at Aquarius when we start the new year. And part of that, the confirmation of that many people are making is that we haven't had Jupiter and Saturn conjunct in air signs because their conjunctions mark. I put out a tweet about this the other day. Their conjunctions uh, mark significant epochs in history depending on the element that they're in, and they haven't been conjuncting in air for something like 200 years. They've been conjuncting in like earth signs, and furthermore, they conjuncted at the 0 degree of a sign, which was very unusual because it can be any 30 degrees. And then it did it on Aquarius of all signs, the signs that we're talking about that the precessed equinox is facing in March, that we're estimating to be about this 2,000 year click. And it also did it on the winter solstice, which is connected to the equinox. Equinox is spring, so it's usually the astrological new year, whereas the winter solstice is kind of like marks the astrological end of the year. So that was kind of like an interesting contrasting resonance. So we had that, and then also just the social context of what had happened the preceding like 360 days or whatever, 350 days in 2020, just like our institutions got completely rocked, and there was a number of other significant astrological transits. So we had that meeting, and so people were saying like, yeah, this new 200-year cycle between Saturn and Jupiter at 0 Aquarius on the winter solstice at the end of a very monumental year is our closest estimation of this precession of the equinoxes, because you know, prior to 2,000 years ago, when it was in Aries, where we would have had the development of these systems, that would be one reason why people say that Aries is the first, because that's when the system was being developed. And then we promptly went into 2,000 years of culture, of BC, AD, like before Christ, after death. We're not in the Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Fertile Crescent astrology, agrarian culture. And you look at the word
Whoa.
zodiac in that it means zoodial, it means circle of animals. This is like an agricultural story. So
Whoa.
then we had 2,000 years of religion. And then now we go into it because it moves, the procession moves backwards, Aries being one, and then one of 12, and Pisces being 12 of 12, Aquarius being 11 of 12. And so now we're going into, 2,000 years of, our outlook on the world not being Aries, which was all about war and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and all of that kind of like pre-Christ history. Then we had 2,000 years of religion, and now we're going into 2,000 years of um, kind of like humanitarian engineering and advancements and consciousness and technology and understanding, even things like astrology itself, understanding our purpose here and things of that nature. So that's where that comes into play.
It's and we'll go for another 5 minutes or so. There's
Sure.
this like really interesting because it's an ending, and so there's the grief of the ending,
Yeah,
and
that's
uh,
right. That's right.
but it's
Pisces
like
is about grief too. It's the
Pisces is about
water
grief.
sign. It's the sorrow. It's the tears. It's the wine and communion. It's the deep waters.
Hmm. What about space and deep water, oceans and stuff like that? Do you think we're going into space? Do you think like I love the juxtaposition talking about the Pocahontas and other things. It's like the juxtaposition of all sorts of things because I hang out with the people who are doing the space satellites and all this different stuff, and then hang
Right.
out with people who are believe that none of it exists, and then the other
Right.
people who believe that it's all flat, that there is no Earth.
That's right.
And it's been one of my best friends is a flat earther, and it's funny because it's very hard to pinpoint what's going on. Do you think we're headed to space? Do you think we're like that's a part of our future?
I certainly think there's going to be a lot of interest in that. And it's going to be massive. But it's interesting because Pluto is the sign of the depths, and it's a water planet at heart, honestly.
Hmm.
And then Pluto or Aquarius is a sign of the heights. It's the skies, and so that's why we're seeing a lot of the stuff in the skies get kind of seeing a lot of breakdowns. So drones are reconfiguring our notion of warfare, but also, just communication and delivery like that.
Mhm.
But then there's also this real groundswell of attention around like Boeing and just how
The
well planned
failures.
service and failures around
Yeah.
that. So it's interesting. It's almost kind of like at a mass commercial level, we may find that people are flying less while the more um, kind of like space exploration. And that's funny too, because we talk about how like NASA, you know, related to like a public thing like American government isn't doing as much as like a private entity like SpaceX. Yeah, I think that we'll see it like reserved for smaller, more focused projects. And so even if we do space exploration, it won't have the same, again, kind of collective fascination as it did when people
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
watching
Yeah.
rocket launches on syndicated TV. Um, so yeah, I do feel like as a result, I think maybe we'll see like more interest, yeah, in deep sea exploration, and then tangentially, Pluto is related to volcanoes, and a lot of like volcanic activity happens out at sea, and so I think like Pluto also relates to magnetism and electromagnetism. So, and Musk has even himself has even talked about this. I think we'll learn more about the in school. It's like, oh, it's a thin crust and then magma and then like an iron core, right? That was a whole like kind of like almost like as if Earth is a freaking cheesecake or something like that. Like and how that affects our understanding of earthquakes and volcanoes. I think we're going to see a lot of like more attention to Earth's inner core, the volcanoes and the tectonic plates and magma and kind of like hollow Earth conspiracy theories and deep sea type stuff, and caves and things of that nature, hollow Earth portals and such, and even kind of like like Antarctic ice walls and what is it? Not advanced civilizations, but and not alternative civilizations. That phrase is escaping me right now. Um, but yeah, basically like parallel civilizations type thing. I think we'll see more of that because that's also what Aquarius is. It's the outsider of all outsiders. It's the most alien and extraterrestrial thing we can imagine, and it doesn't necessarily have to um, come from space. It can come from territories on Earth that we just previously didn't give credence to or have access to, you know, because we'll probably see, I think, again, like kind of joking about kind of like the sandwich model of the Earth and its makeup, as far as its interior. I think one of the big things that we'll see through the 2020s going into the 2030s is we will look at globes, which used to be like in every office and every schoolroom, like again, like another Seinfeld thing, and we'll see that as like kind of like an antiquated toy. I think we're going to see like a redrawing of the global map. Um,
Mhm.
and not because it's like flat or that I agree with the flat earthers, but they'll probably have a heyday with this too. It could just be that it could just be for various reasons that we have. There could be a
Yeah,
displacement
interesting.
of territories that a lot of this is going to happen through online. And of course, with deep fakes and stuff, there will be a counter response to whether that stuff is true. But yeah, I think people are going to like, and people do that where they like have like the Hyperborean and kind of Atlantean maps
Yeah.
that posted on Twitter and stuff. But I think it's just it's trending in that direction. So the space, yeah, it's still happening, but I think the space is here. And it's like that's where the exploration is going to happen because people have lamented
Yeah.
for a while, like born too late to explore the Wild West, born too early to explore Mars. It's like, well, just don't
That's bullshit. Yeah, you're about to explore a lot of
get
things. Yeah.
exactly don't get on
Yeah.
the nothing ever happens
Yeah.
bandwagon yet. Like there's some curveballs coming, I think, in that regard.
So many curveballs, it seems like. And it seems like, I mean, maybe this is the last question, but like it seems like the curveballs are just going to continue to happen all the
Oh gosh.
time. Like it's already been happening, but that was just preparation for the crazy things
Yes.
that are in the pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. The previous curveballs were almost like appetizers, and I kind of feel, yeah, like to your point, I feel like even in just a lot July, we'll look back at this conversation and be like, wow, we didn't even see that coming. Um,
But it's not
because
in a way that's like dystopian either, because it's like,
no,
yeah.
no, I don't think it's going to be dystopian. I think it is going to give people a real chance to kind of engage with their world. Um, and I think it could be fun in a way because it is so bracing and so fast and kind of loud that it feels. I mean that's where I was kind of like leaning into this earlier, but that's where I do kind of like people be having like low expectations because it does seem like we are being encouraged to kind of like take the pressure off of ourselves in some ways to like have some grand capital A answer to all of this, and some of these curveballs can show us that it's not up to us to kind of follow certain rules anymore, and that it's okay to follow your own path and see where that comes from, rather than feeling like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. So I agree that curveballs can be really liberating in that regard.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming on the show. How can our
Thank you
listeners
so
find
much
out
for
more about
having
you?
me. They can learn more about me at Zeitful Media. That's Zeitville Media on X. And then that's also my handle for Substack, zeitfulmedia.substack.com. I also just launched a YouTube channel last week, so I hope to be doing just as much stuff there. And that again is at Zeitful Media. If you go and search that on YouTube, I'm sure right now it's some kind of monster slang of various characters, until I can get that nailed down to where it's like youtube.com/cyber media. But that's me on YouTube as well. And so yeah, going for like a multimedia approach now. But where I do my daily post is on X, and that's where I have a lot of fun with images and like poetic language, and people are interacting. So yeah, definitely come on over there and hang out and see what's going on the daily.